Hi and welcome again. This is Cheryl Cook.
This is Victor Dorman.
Welcome to our podcast. So, Victor, I'm going to be playing a few segments from edits of a particular meeting, and then I'm going to ask for your comment afterwards.
Sure.
A brief background and history. Back in December of 2010, the city with the city of Northport with the Sarasota County jointly and equally purchased Warm Mineral Springs at a cost of $5.5 million. The county, using Parkland Acquisition Program funds and the city using surtax funds, purchased what is 81-acre parcel, which is known as Warm Mineral Springs, which includes the Warm Mineral Springs itself. With that purchase, there was a 30-month operating agreement with the then owner-operator, Cypress Lending. That 30-month agreement is due to expire June 30th of 2013. After a number of visioning sessions were conducted whereby citizens' input for the Springs future was gathered and research as to how the Springs how others operate Springs, staff was directed on July 16th to develop an invitation to negotiate. The invitation to negotiate was to be developed to solicit proposers to develop and operate the Springs. Just to let you know, the ITN is one of several different solicitation processes that are available to governmental agencies. And to paraphrase Florida statutes, the use of the invitation to negotiate, or ITN, is used to determine the best method for achieving a specific goal or solving a particular problem, and identifies one or more vendors with which an agency may negotiate to receive the best value. With that direction for staff to develop the ITN, staff was directed to bring back a scope of services for review by both commissions. Additionally, the commissions also approved at that July meeting for the city to take the lead in the development of the and issuing of the ITN. In order for the county to properly transfer full procurement responsibilities to the city, an interlocal agreement has been developed which outlines the responsibilities and obligations of each entity. If I could digress a little bit to talk about the ITN itself, as our city manager alluded to, the two staffs, county and the city, have been working together diligently to develop the ITN, which provides a framework and process to solicit an operator developer for Warm Mineral Springs. In the development of the ITN, we have attempted to design a solicitation to allow respondents flexibility in communicating a vision for the future of the development and operation of the facility to spur economic development, while providing for the protection of the springs, the water, and the archaeological resources. The ITN process itself is divided into two phases. The first phase is the evaluation or selection phase, while the second phase is the negotiation phase. In the evaluation selection phase, all responsive replies will be evaluated against the evaluation criteria that has been established within the ITN. Based on a selection committee's overall assessment of the submittals, presentations, questions and answer sessions, one or more respondents may be invited to enter into negotiations with the negotiations team. Now, one of the requests that we'll be making is for you to identify a selection team. We're not asking you to identify those individuals at this meeting. We're offering a composition of that selection committee, and it's strictly our suggestion that one member be appointed by the City Commission, one member be appointed by the County Commission, one member be appointed by the Sarasota EDC, and one member be appointed by Visit Sarasota County, with the fifth and final member being jointly selected by both commissions. Again, we're not asking you at this time to make any selections. It's only that we're asking for this composition to be approved. We would like to point out that members appointed by the respective commissions should have the knowledge and/or experience in the subject matter that we're going to be dealing with in the ITN, and that is the development and operation of Warm Mineral Springs. We're looking probably, and this is strictly a suggestion or for consideration, somebody with planning background, a development background, real estate or business operations. While you might want to consider the joint appointment with an individual having experience or background in environmental or natural resources. Again, only suggestions. For the negotiation phase, once a respondent or more has been selected by the selection committee, they're directed to the negotiations team. The negotiation phase representatives are to be determined by the city manager and county administrator to serve on the team. This negotiation team may request revised replies and/or best and final offers based on the negotiations. Following negotiations, the negotiation team will submit an intended contract award for approval by the city and county commissions, identifying the responsive and responsible respondent who provides the best value. We've developed a timeline specifically based on this meeting and the meeting that will be conducted by the county commission on December 4th, that if everything goes just right, we'd be able to put the invitation to negotiate out on the street the following day, December 5th. With that, we would have a pre-submittal information session for those respondents that are or those individuals that are interested in responding, that would be held at Warm Mineral Springs on January 2nd of 2013. We would have a submission deadline for proposals on February 4th. Selection committee review would begin the following week in February, with negotiations to occur within the month of April. And if everything falls just perfectly in line, we'd have a contract back to you in May for consideration. In closing, just like to readdress what we are trying to achieve today, and that is first to approve a contract, the interlocal agreement between the Sarasota County and the City of Northport regarding procurement responsibilities for Warm Mineral Springs development and operations. Approve the invitation to negotiate, the ITN. Approve the composition of the selection committee, that being one member appointed by the City Commission, one member being appointed by the County Commission, one member being appointed by the Sarasota EDC, one member being appointed by Visit Sarasota, and the final and fifth member being jointly appointed by the two commissions. And finally, we ask that you authorize the city manager and county administrator to jointly select the members of the Warm Mineral Springs negotiations team. With that, I will ask for...
Okay, Victor, you've never heard that discussion yet, have you?
Never heard it.
What that was is our assistant city manager, longtime assistant city manager, Danny Schultz, presenting what the ITN, the development document, was when it first came back to us in November 2012. And you can hear how complicated the whole thing was.
Yeah, it takes quite a few activities to reach a acceptable solution. When I say acceptable solution, according to the goal, I make a disclosure. I did meet Mr. Schultz back in 2017 when he was still assistant manager of the city, but never touched on this subject. But he underlined a few elements that need to be in place in order to successfully develop a maintenance and operational plan for the springs. In the vision discussion that occurred 10 years ago, I'm sorry, it didn't appear that there was any grandiose scheme to develop, multi-family homes around us. It was mostly because Mr. Schultz articulated conservation and usage of the spring without big impact by providing some benefits to the public to enjoy the water, the facility which would be there. But definitely he delineated the complexity and the tedious process to reach a conclusion. The conclusion should be based on the studies, the information, which will be like parallel discussion with potential developers, and then having a secondary team, so-called negotiation team, to conclude which is the best for the public interest. So again, I think he was a good, based on his facts, a good thinker about what should take place, and he was assessing the complexity of the things to be done for, again, a conclusion, an acceptable conclusion on the public's interest.
Yeah, it is the public's interest. That was actually an ITM that was approved by all 10 commissioners in July 2012 at a joint meeting, and that was before Rhonda DeFranco and I got in office in November. So let's look at a couple of public comments at that time, because this is a hot issue right now in Northport, War Mineral Springs, and let's see if anybody now can relate to what was being said back then.
Sure.
Steve Barnhart.
Steve Barnhart, Estates Drive. I'll be very brief. Just listening to Mr. Schultz's presentation with a very aggressive time scheduling on this thing. I'm very concerned about that. This whole thing was really kind of railroaded and shoved down our throat, and that's now we're starting to see problems that are coming up out of that because it was dealt with so quickly. As a former contractor, I can tell you right now, you're looking at a very big venture for anybody to come into, and they're not going to, within a matter of a couple weeks, give you a proposal based on spending millions of dollars. If you're going to get anybody decent to come in, they're going to require probably months to do studies, whether it's studies of how many people are living within certain areas. There's just a whole range of studies that they will do. I've dealt with Walgreens and some of these other people, and I've seen some of the intensity of some of these studies that they do. When they're investing millions of dollars, they want to make sure that whatever they're doing and dealing with is going to be a capital producing venture. They're not going to just jump into this thing and give you a good proposal in a matter of a couple weeks. So you're going to end up losing your really good people because they're just going to look at it and say, well, you're asking for us to commit to this thing and not giving us adequate time to study it. So I would really highly encourage you to step back from this thing and allow a much longer time frame if you do go forward with this thing for any of the contractors to bid on this.
Jennifer Cohen.
Hi, Jennifer Cohen, Northport. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for listening to us today. This is extremely important to those of us who live here in Northport. We've been exposed to War Mineral Springs for years. We've seen it in its worst state, and we've seen it in a pretty decent state today for visitors and tourists that are coming to our area. We know that it's important to many of the cultural folks that live in that area. They enjoy the springs, but I really have a concern when we start to think about partnering with the county on this project and not being in control of it. This is Northport. War Mineral Springs is Northport, and we need to remember that. We need to be the majority on the committee at all times when it's living in our city. I think that's extremely important. I thank you for looking over this. I also agree that maybe we do need to step back and make sure we're doing the right thing. I agree with many people here today. We're all concerned. It's a major part of our city. I believe 81 acres. This is huge. It's not a small little parcel. And it's also, I thank you, sir, for your time today and explaining to the entire population in Northport that it's extremely important to look at geological studies before you just tear up or dismember an area of our county. So I thank you. Thank you.
That I have for you is with regard to this selection committee, and maybe looking at it from my mindset was that, again, we're the elected body responsible to all of our constituents, and we would probably handle something like this the way we would in, say, hiring a charter officer, that we as elected board and body are the ones that are going to be looking at proposals and in a project of this magnitude. So is that a possibility here? I mean, instead of doing a non-elected selection committee for all of these different plans that are going to be coming in with this ITN?
Do you want to?
I think that hits a couple of different things. So let me do my best, Mayor, to try and respond. If I misunderstood the question, then maybe you'll help me out afterwards. The issue of the negotiation team is a little bit different than because there's the two different actions in there: the makeup of the selection and then the negotiations team. It is not normal in practice for a policy-making body to sit as the reviewer in competitive selections. That's not normal in the scope of duties with the with elected officials serving as the policymakers of the organization. If that is a recommendation that comes out of this commission to the county commission, that certainly could be something that everybody would have to discuss, but that is not normal for policymaking boards to be sitting in that way. There are exceptions, as you noted, when we went through the selection of a charter officer, whether it was myself or Mr. Robinson. You are the only body that can make that selection. So that, that's certainly something, but it would not be normal in competitive selection for the elected body, again, the policy-making body, to go through that. Again, maybe the answer is that they would identify a more specific expectation on the front end, which was not done in this particular case, but the direction was to develop the ITN, which gave the broad parameters so that negotiations could be had, trying to bring back the most advantageous opportunity for both the city and the county as a whole.
So Victor, that was pretty scathing. And what Mr. Lewis was saying, and I could not say it better than him, he's a professional. There are some practices that policy-making bodies, which means a commission, should not be involved in. And so we see on the screen now, this is the person, right, on the screen, Connie Bruni, who wrote the city's charter. And Victor, here is the policy-making body, such that it is. Of course, this was after the 2016 election and before the special election. So the policy-making body, we have Vanessa Carrasone, Linda Yates, Debbie McDowell, and Chris Hanks, together with Connie Bruni and 3 members of the Charter Review Advisory Board. And they are writing the city's constitution on the dais. Let me show you one more picture. And Victor, here's my 3rd photograph. This is March 30th, 2021. And again, here's your policy-making body: Barbara Langdon, Pete Emmerich, Jill Luke, Alice White, and Debbie McDowell. Down here we have 2 members of the PZAB. So these are the policymakers who are are writing the entire ULDC, and this is what they've been doing for almost 7 years. And now we harken back to Mr. Lewis's comment that we should not, the policymaking body should not even be involved in anything past approving a selection committee. Yet here we have 2 of the 3 main contracts with the residents, the ULDC and the charter, written on the dais by the policymaking body. What do you think about this?
Well, I think Mr. Lewis understands very well what the roles and responsibilities are of an elected body, legislative body, versus the operational committees or, staff of the city. You hire the staff and you appoint committees because you entrust them to do certain work. So I 100% agree with him. But I want to point out that if the commissioners or any elected body wants to inject themselves, the proper time is when they receive the product to ask the questions.
There you go. Yes.
That's the time, and adjustment can be made. You can ask them, can you do that, and so forth. But it's not their role to get in nitty-gritty because they are not elected, and therefore why would you have a city staff, departments, and so forth if they do it all? We have seen the last year going the opposite direction where they didn't want to deal with that, and I repeated before, their fiscal responsibility, they wanted to push it on to approve. Well, they are the approving body, and they have the duty and the right to ask questions. The same pertains to this situation. As you pointed out, the charter and the ULDC, they are kind of the fundamental laws of the city.
And the comprehensive
And
plan.
comprehensive, it's the second to the charter.
Okay.
And both of this situation depict very clearly that by the question asked by the former mayor, they don't understand how much they can infringe on what the work should be done by the hired and the appointed.
Yeah, and I wonder if any of these 3 documents or any of the contents in the 3 documents, especially the ULDC, if they're challenged in court, I wonder how these documents would hold up. And let me preface that and say, especially since Northport is a teeny tiny poor city compared to the really large money-making cities in the state of Florida, like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Tallahassee. We don't include that in it, but we have the legislators are going to be directing their attention to the real moneymakers. So now you have a teeny tiny little city that are going to have to drag in the legislators to protect them because we've seen it before. And because they would not, it's not that they don't understand the position, they don't want to adhere to their position. If they came and were honest during an election, during a campaign and said, oh, I intend to write your ULDC, I intend to write your charter, how many people would elect them? Because people are electing them supposedly based on them passing budgets and writing policy.
Yeah, well, I know a little bit of the history of ULDC because when I came here in 2017, it was the University of Miami who was doing it. At the time they pulled it back, and we are still not done,
University of Florida, that's right.
Correct. So these are fundamental pieces of legislative that people with the experience, people who have done benchmarking, they know what happens and how congruent are with the state law. As a city commissioner, I don't think that they're experts in state law. They are not experts in land use law, and therefore they have the ability to question when the product is ready, and they should read it. I believe that any commissioner who's sitting or aspires should read what the document is because it's fundamental. But at the same time, they have to refrain for interference and let the product be done with the utmost quality, utmost qualification, and then learn from it and question if there is something, nothing is perfect in this world. So if they observe something which maybe it can be phrased, or they have known that other city have done, so be it, but they are not the experts. And therefore let these documents be written by those qualified, and chip in when the public debate, because this should be part of the public debate anyhow.
And those are the things that they're leaving out. I can tell you the University of Florida began their work. They had an itinerary. Here's what we'll do at this time. You have a timeline, and that's exactly what they were talking about with the ITN. Well, Mr. Barnhart mentioned in the public comment, it was too close of a timeline. Timelines are important. They've been writing this ULDC on the dais since 2018 by themselves, and they fired the University of Florida. Don't know why, but in other words, they got rid of all of the professional help. They hired a consultant, but I'm not quite sure what that was for, because I've done different pieces where the university, this consultant brought out some extremely troublesome problems, and it was never addressed, because that's when the electeds took it over from that consultant. And now there's a whole different relationship with the consultant, but they're writing it. Here they are sitting on the dais, and there's two of their members of the PZAP in a joint meeting writing the ULDC.
The same problems I've seen at the charter time, because they even went and approved, they passed an ordinance without going through the proper channel. And I remember writing to Ms. Slayton, about
Yes, right.
the illegality of such action, and they went back to the charter
Only because
board.
you sent that email.
Because I sent that email. So definitely, even the attorney didn't guide them the right way. So let the work take place where it belongs, and in that situation was the charter advisory board, and it was not happening the right way, so again was infringing on their law which was passed, not talking about other laws of the state.
And in January 2017, the then Charter Review Board, headed by Dave Samuels, and the city attorney, Mark Moriarty, did give them a very intense document, and the document said, hire a consultant. Well, they threw it away.
Correct. I know Mr. Samuels,
Yes,
because he
you do.
lives in my neighborhood here, and I know his background.
Yeah.
He has been involved in these matters for all his lifetime. I know the history of the charter.
And he's still on it.
Everybody, he's on the county charter,
and he was elected.
an elected official.
That's right.
Now, at that time, I remember going with Mr. Samuels when the charter referendum, before going to the referendum, and pointing out a few problems. And also I was very concerned by the fact that he and many others have resigned. Technically there was
That's right. Everyone.
a ghost charter board, because nobody was listening. So again, you have this, by your ordinance, has to prepare the proposal to be vetted, have the opportunity to debate them, and now only after that they go in on a resolution, correct?
In an ordinance.
But it was an ordinance, I'm
Yes.
sorry, it was ordinance.
Right.
Thank you for correcting me. So that shows a few holes in the whole process.
And not just to interrupt, they had one community conversation. I was at that conversation, and there was an elected at each table where citizens were supposed to speak. In other words, there was no free flow of thought. And I can tell you that there was a candidate, Mr. Badalata, at that time, who was being screamed at by one of the elected. You couldn't miss hearing her screaming at him. And there were maybe 6 or 7 residents who showed up, one of which was a little girl, was there with her mom. I have pictures. So that community conversation came in between draft number 5, 6, 7, or 8. In other words, that was a dog and pony show. The charter, and we spoke on it, you and I, on a totally different platform, and that is not the charter that the residents had their input on. That was not the charter that
Yeah.
eventually went in.
And excuse me, many people don't know what a charter is. It's the fundamental law by which the city is organized and should function, spelling out the history of the city in summary, who leads it, who has the powers, what are the major departments by charter that have to exist, and you cannot disband it only via referendum. So it's a very high level but very good law of the city. Is the fundamental, it's the constitution. Just for people to know that belongs to us.
That's
And,
right.
and,
That's-
and
that's-
nothing can be changed without a referendum.
Yes, but the problem is,
But how do you get there to the referendum if you don't get the right input?
correct, and the problem is that because they being marketed by one person in particular, going to different HOAs in these little secret meetings, and by another individual on a radio with the city attorney marketing it so that people would vote for it. The problem is there are items in that new charter, and I call it a new because it was all passed under one sentence. And in the new charter, there are situations that have not been addressed. So anytime you get a commission in office that knows how to, or has the boldness to pass an ordinance to address something that hasn't been addressed yet in the charter, we can't go back and say, well, we don't want it because we passed the whole thing and we have no idea what's in it, what's been changed. And so, anyway, I thought this was all relevant.
There is a very documented state law that, any referendum has to be pertaining to one subject. In that situation was revamped, the whole thing. It was not a cosmetic or a just rewording of certain paragraphs. It was changes, fundamental changes, and we don't have to repeat them right now. But that's the problem. It's when things happen and people are not astute or they are not following, things will happen detrimental to the public interest.
Yeah. So I guess that ends this particular podcast, Victor. We've covered a lot of bases with just one topic, I guess. I mean, it was one topic led to a couple of others, but I really appreciate your helping me kind of define this because you see things in it that I don't.
Yeah, and I personally, I don't consider myself very knowledgeable in the government, but as I participated in both city as well as the district where I was official on the board, I was exposed to various state laws, and it's mandatory, sunshine and etc. But again, why are we having elected official? Because they have to represent the public interest. And then that is the first rule which should prevail in everybody's mind.
Well, thanks for joining us.